Here's the conclusion of my three-part story about my amazing UFO encounter. This is where the ultimate purpose of the original encounter is finally revealed. Hi, I'm Saratoga Ocean, and I help people to navigate their spiritual awakening and embark on a powerful path of ascension. In this video, I'm going to share part 3 of my amazing UFO and extraterrestrial experience and how that led to my walk-in experience and my purpose for being on this earth. So if you haven't seen part 1 and part 2, go watch those now. I'll put the link above and also in the description below. Then come back to this video where you will see the final conclusion. And leave me a comment below and type in the word yes if you have ever had an ET or UFO experience, or if you know someone else who has. So now let's get on to the final conclusion of this story. Now, as you remember, in parts 1 and 2 of this story, I describe all of the amazing and synchronous and truly metaphysical events that led up to my presence here as a walk-in. Now, if you're not familiar with the term walk-in, here's what it means. Now, usually a human body goes through its entire lifespan with only one person occupying that body. Now, in a walk-in situation, which is very rare, the original person is born in the usual way and lives out their planned amount of time on this earth until whatever age they are ready to depart, as in death. But in a walk-in scenario, instead of the physical body also dying at the time of their departure, a second person enters into that body and sets in motion a completely different life stream and purpose. And generally, that purpose is one of service to the planet. So parts 1 and 2 were primarily about the person who was here before me, whose name was Karen. So let's pick up from where I left off in part 2. Where we left off in part 2 was when, through an amazing series of divinely orchestrated events, Karen shifted her career from being a fitness professional to channeling spirit guides full-time on a professional level. Now, she was actually really enjoying this work, but as you may recall, she didn't think she would be doing it for a whole lot longer. So let's continue the story from here. Now, if you remember, she was living with her boyfriend at the time. And one night she said something very strange to him. She said, "You know, I think if we're going to get married, we'd better do it now because I have a feeling I'm going to be going somewhere." Now, she had no idea what this meant, and she said, "Maybe I'm going to New York or something like that." Which makes no sense, right? But they instinctively knew that there was something to this idea of why they needed to get married now, because something unforeseen was going to happen. So they talked it over and decided to make their wedding plans. Months later, they had their wedding, they got married, and then everything pretty much went back to the way it had been. Now, at this point, Karen was holding regular group channeling sessions a couple of nights a week and was doing private channelings for individuals. But a very odd thing started happening during her group sessions. Every now and then, a being would come in who was vastly different from the other spirit guides. Now, by this time, Karen was moving into being what I call a full body channel. So the spirit guides were able to open their eyes and even take a drink of water when necessary. But these very different beings who began to come in were exceedingly powerful and of a much higher vibration. And they were not able to stay in the body for very long, and they could not open their eyes. In fact, they could barely even lift their heads and could only speak a few sentences at a time. but the difference in their energy was really striking. And over time, they began showing up more and more and were increasingly able to use the body more effectively. And eventually, they finally revealed themselves as a group of 5 different beings known as Telstar. Now, I've told you guys that free will is king in this universe, right? So one night, Karen saw what I would call a group of cosmic elders appear to her. And this was like a really formal situation. And they said they needed her agreement and her permission to channel Telstar exclusively. And her response was yes, but she said to herself, I feel like I've already agreed to this. You see, she felt that this encounter was basically a formality and that somewhere along the way, this agreement had already been made. And she was, of course, exactly right. Because all of these events, including my own walk-in experience, had all been agreed to prior to her birth. But it was important for this formal agreement to take place for her on a conscious level while she was actually on this planet. So shortly after that, she stopped channeling spirit guides altogether and began channeling these 5 different beings in Telstar exclusively. Now, there was also a 6th being, but that one came much later on. So in the beginning, there were 3 men and 2 women who were channeling as Telstar. Now, the men's names were Mikhail, who you might also know as Archangel Michael, and John and Adam. And the women's names were Isadora and Mirabai. Now, I want to mention that these names, including the name Telstar, were strictly for purposes of planet Earth and were used to be in compliance with Earth-based language patterns. You know, sometimes we forget that the rest of the universe does not necessarily use our Earth-based languages. Now, for a long time, Karen just assumed that these beings were a more powerful form of spirit guides. But as time went on, she started saying to herself, I think maybe I've connected up with a bunch of extraterrestrials. That idea was never really confirmed or not, but it was just a little bit unsettling for her. But here's what made this so much easier to deal with. You see, by now, her interdimensional senses were so well developed that she was able to see and speak with them in the same way that you would see and speak to anyone else. And they are physically gorgeous. They are the absolute embodiment of light and love. And here's what's even more unusual. When you see them in their, I'll call it their natural state, they actually appear more real than our physical dimension. In fact, they are unable to enter our physical dimension for that reason, because we are actually quite etheric by comparison. Now, I know that may not make a lot of sense if you're into talking about densities and all of that, but this is just a whole different universe that we are talking about. I mean, they look human just like we do, but their colors are so vivid and so full of light that the colors here in our world look actually very dim by comparison. Because what we see here in the physical world is actually reflected light. And these beings are the literal embodiment and manifestation of true light, which is not reflected light. And this is why they have to channel through a physical earth body in order to be able to speak to us. I mean, there's just no way they can just walk into our physical dimension as who they really are. It's just not physically possible. So anyway, by now there were so many changes happening in Karen's life. I can't even begin to go into all of them. But can you just imagine? It's almost like living interdimensionally at the same time you're living in this physical world where you're having these interactions with these other dimensional beings. I mean, that's really a lot, especially for someone who came from the background of resistance that she came from, if you remember how I talked about that in the first video. Now I'm going to share with you a truly profound turning point in this story. Some months later, something very odd happened one morning when she got up. She woke up with a deep feeling that there was nothing more left for her to do in her life. I mean, there was literally nothing left that she wanted to do. And it was not a feeling of depression or anything like that. It was actually very neutral. It was just like this very clear sense of knowing. I think I'd say that it was more like a revelation. I mean, it's really impossible to describe because there aren't any reference points for what I'm trying to explain to you guys, because this is the beginning of what was starting to happen for a person who's about to leave this earth permanently. So she spent the entire day basically just kind of being with this very unusual experience. And what made this very difficult for me to describe to you guys is that there was no emotion connected to this. It was just like clarity, and it was very, very neutral. So later on, her husband comes home from work, and a very unusual conversation starts to develop between them that evening. She starts to tell him a little bit about what she's been experiencing all day, and as they're talking, it's almost like I think they were going into a semi-altered state, and it became very obvious to both of them that she was going to be leaving this earth. And they had no idea what that meant. I mean, she didn't know if she was going to get sick or something was going to happen and she was going to die in some form. I mean, it was really very, very confusing. So as the conversation went on, it became actually quite emotional, and there was crying that was happening, and it was just really very abnormal. In the middle of all this, suddenly she stopped and she said to her husband, "Do you know someone by the name of Saratoga?" And he said, "No, why would you ask me that?" And she said, "I think that's who's coming to take my place." Now, this is crazy because she had no knowledge about walk-ins or any of that. She didn't even know why she even said it. I mean, the entire experience was just completely surreal for both of them. So she was crying on and off, and they were holding on to each other. And then she started to see a brilliant light. And this was the light that you hear people describe who've been through a near-death experience. And this light was so profound. I mean, there's no way to describe it. But the thing is, it was very different from a near-death experience because she was actually going to depart this planet for real. So in seeing this light, she was in a completely altered state and was totally unable to explain to him what was going on. It was like she was in communication with this light that she knew was God. And she knew she was going to depart this earth. Now, we hear about these experiences from those who actually come back and don't really depart the earth. But it's very, very different when you really are going to leave. So I'll do my best to describe that to you guys, but it's really, really indescribable. It's kind of like, it's not really merging with the light, but it's like you're connecting with this light that I guess most would call the Almighty. And the thing that was so striking about this is that, at least in her consciousness, she was just blown away by the fact that there was no discussion. You see, it's not like there's some discussion about whether or not you really want to go or really should go, or could I stay a little longer and do this? Because see, all of that was gone. I'm telling you, it's literally impossible to describe. It's like, it just is. This is just what it is. Like, it's time. And I don't know how else to describe it. It's so profound, and there's no feeling of fear or emotion or anything. It's just like pure, absolute clarity, pure, absolute knowing that there is this higher power, there is this incredible, beautiful presence of love and light that is in command of all of this, and that you are only able to surrender to that light, because it really is, it's just, there are no gaps, there's just oneness. There's no, I don't know how else to say it. I hope that somehow I'm conveying the feeling of it. It's really honestly impossible because we don't really have reference points for this. So I hope that somehow through what I'm saying, you can just get some tiny little inkling of what I'm trying to describe. And the other thing I'll say about this experience is that it's completely timeless. It's like you're no longer in time. You're no longer in the space-time continuum. You are just in this place that, I guess that's really all I can tell you guys, because there's just no words to describe it. It's really that profound. Now, the thing is, she did not leave in that moment, but she knew that she was going to be leaving for sure. I mean, it was like, it was already done, and you don't argue with that power, you know what I mean? There's no discussion about it. It just is. Now, after she came out of this timeless experience with this light, things started to calm down for her and her husband, and they just kind of came out of this whole thing in a very calm way. And they really had no idea what to do next, so they just decided they should just go to bed. So her transition and my arrival happened over the course of that night. And from this point on, I really can't share anything more about her, but this is where I can begin to share my own walk-in experience with you. And this is not really an easy thing to do, but I noticed that no one ever talks about this, so I really thought it was important to share this so that you could understand how profound and amazing life really is. So here's what I can share with you about my experience of coming into this body and into this planet for the very first time. It was kind of like looking down and making a final decision to go forward with this. Almost like, I guess the best analogy I can think of is like if you're looking over the edge of a cliff, sort of like that. And then I could feel myself descending slowly into this dimension and into her reality. And it was very odd because it was like as I was going down, I went into like boxes, that each box was like a container that held a different aspect of her life. It was almost like a compartment, but everything was box shaped. It was weird. It was like I went from one and then I went down to another, and in each one I spent time familiarizing myself with that aspect of her life. So I kept going like from one box to another box to another box, and it was just, the whole feeling was one of descending. At some point, when I guess that process was complete, at some point everything just went completely black. It was like total black, unconscious nothingness. There was just like nothing. And from that blackness, I woke up in this body, in her bed, the next morning. I think it was around 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was there laying in bed next to her husband. And all I remember is I sat up in bed and I was just looking straight ahead, and I said these words, "It is done." Now her husband, either he was already awake or he woke up. I think he might have been already awake. And I don't remember the exact conversation that we had, but the odd thing was, it was like he understood. He knew exactly what I meant. So clearly he had been taken on his own journey through all of this. And I think it's really obvious that he had been receiving some form of subconscious communication or intuitive communication all along the way. I mean, he had to have had some kind of other dimensional support Otherwise, there's just no way he would have been able to cope with this. So I got out of bed and I felt really kind of tentative and very sensitive and kind of delicate. It was literally like waking up in a strange place on another planet, which is true because that's really what happened. I mean, it wasn't like I had no idea where I was. That wasn't true at all, because fortunately there's a brain in everybody's head that has memory of all this stuff. So it's like I pretty much knew what was going on around me, obviously. So I walked all around the house and I was looking at everything and I was touching things, and it was just like, it was like trying to integrate with this experience. Now, I want to mention that normally in a walk-in experience, it doesn't unfold in such a profoundly conscious way as it did in my situation. But you have to understand, if you follow this story from the very beginning, which I talked about in the first part, the other video, we're talking about quite a few years of preparation, major preparation. That is what actually made it possible for me to walk in the way that I did and be fully conscious of exactly what was going on. So here I am in this situation with this other person's husband, right? Trying to integrate with the entire situation. And as the morning unfolded, he and I just started to talk about the situation we were in and what to do about it. And I told him that I really didn't want to see or talk to anyone else for 3 days. I felt like I needed that time to adjust to everything on a vibrational level. But as we were talking, we agreed to make one exception to that. We felt that it was really important for us to talk to Karen's mother about what had happened. So he called her up and asked her to come over because we had something really important that we needed to discuss with her. So she came over and we started to explain to her exactly what had happened. And the three of us were sitting at the dining room table, and she was sitting directly across from me. And at one point she just peered right into my eyes and she said to me, "I can tell that you are not her." Now, honestly, this entire experience was really unsettling for me because it was not lost on me that these two people had just lost perhaps the most important person in their lives. So the whole situation was calm on the surface, but you could just feel how unsettled it was. But I still felt like there was a lot of energetic support, maybe angelic support, but there was a lot of support that made it possible for everyone to navigate through this very unusual experience. And that's putting it mildly, right? And I think it was made somewhat easier because Karen's physical body was not destroyed, which is what usually happens when a person dies, right? I think it's the destruction of the physical body that makes it so traumatic for the people who are left behind. And in this case, because that didn't happen, I think it made it a whole lot easier for everyone to just find a way through all of this. So after Karen's mother left, her husband and I basically spent the next 3 days just dealing with our situation and trying to adjust to how we were going to handle everything. Now, during those 3 days, I was also aware that Karen in her spirit state was visiting her loved ones. And this is very typical when someone dies. They will often spend a great deal of time around their loved ones before they move on to their next phase. But this was really hard for me because I literally felt caught in the middle of a situation that to me seemed really quite sad. And I really struggled with this because I didn't know what to say to the people that she had left behind. I mean, I couldn't imagine how her husband and her mother must have felt. I mean, there was no funeral, there was no death, so it was really very strange for me to be witnessing this. So after those 3 days, I decided that the best thing for everyone involved was for me to just not say anything to anyone about what had happened and just go on and pretend like nothing had happened and pretend like I was her. I mean, I kind of thought this would work out because I thought, well, I could just be the channel for Telstar and no one has to know about this walk-in thing. Now, that turned out to be a huge mistake for me because it forced me to repress my true personality and completely repress whatever messaging I had to bring. Because you see, if I was going to pretend to be her, I could only talk about things that she would know about. So I continued pretending to be her for an entire year. But even so, the chemistry with the people that she knew completely changed. And sometimes the pressure of feeling like I was repressing so much became so great that I secretly confided in a few people that I felt I trusted, and I told them what had happened. Honestly, guys, I was really terrified to say anything, but I did. And the weird thing is, they actually expressed relief. They said they knew it. They said it was the only thing that made any sense, and they were actually really glad that I told them. So that was my little experiment in pretending to be someone you're not, meaning I was pretending to be Karen because I thought it would benefit other people. And if you want to know more about that, go check out this video where I talk more about that. So this concludes part 3 of what began as a truly astonishing UFO encounter that led to years of preparation, which made it possible for me to arrive here in a fully conscious state as a walk-in. So basically, I am also a part of Telstar, and my role is to facilitate our work as Telstar here on this planet. And that involves assisting in spiritual awakening, facilitating ascension, and human and planetary evolution. And with that, I'm sending you so much love, light, and loads of positive energy. Have a beautiful day. Namaste.